I'm Dr. Lee Cooley with the Eastern Carolina Christian College and Seminary. Welcome to my session, and my session is called The Smooth Writer. So I want to cover the basic requirements for writing papers at the Eastern Carolina Christian College and Seminary. Every paper must have a title page. And there is a standard format for the title page, depending upon your program of study, whether that is for the certificate, the associate, the undergraduate, or the graduate program. The standard title page format for papers written by certificate, associate, and bachelor students at the college is utilized for this research paper that I have written and that I am going to go through with you. It is a very brief research paper. The title of the paper is displayed at the top of the title page. And we have, if you will look at the attached slide, you will see that midway of the paper is my name. Underneath my name is the title of the class that I am writing the paper for. And underneath the title of the class is my professor's name and my professor's credentials. Then when we go down to the bottom of the page, we have the name of the school, Eastern Carolina Christian College and Seminary, the city or town of the school, which is Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina, and the day that the paper is submitted. Depending upon your program of study, once again, there may be some modifications to that title page. And those modifications are determined by your professor. Okay? Now, all of the items on the title page are centered and bold-faced. So that is one thing that you need to remember. Now we're going to talk about typeface, or the font within your paper. Times New Roman is the typeface that is recommended by Turabian for professional papers. What is the Turabian? Turabian is the manual for writers of research papers, theses, and dissertations. We call it the Turabian, and it was coordinated by Kate L. Turabian. And throughout the years, it has been modified and updated. And the Eastern Carolina Christian College and Seminary uses all of the regs of the Turabian. So some, you may be accustomed to APA or some other writing styles, but at the Eastern Carolina Christian College and Seminary, we now rely upon only the Kate Turabian. So every student is required to purchase a Kate Turabian. And this will be like a, I hate to use the word Bible. Let's see if this will be one of your best friends, let's put it that way, when it comes to writing your papers at this college. And so because the Kate Turabian states that uses Times New Roman and a 12-point font, Eastern Carolina Christian College and Seminary also relies upon what the Kate Turabian says, and we want a 12-point font throughout the paper, except in instances, for example, for footnotes, where you would use a 10-point font. And we want the Times New Roman typeface. Let's talk about margins. For every paper, your margin should be 1 inch on the top, 1 inch on the right, 1 inch at the bottom, and 1.25 inches on the left. Let me repeat that. 1 inch on the top, right and bottom, and 1.25 inches on the left. And why do we want 1.25 inches on the left? Well, because your paper will be bound. Whether it is bounding in a book format as for the doctoral program, or whether it's in the certificate program where you're going to put it in a folder, okay, and clip it in a folder, that's still being bound. And after you have bound your paper, on the left, it will appear that you have 1 inch. That 0.25 is what is covered in the binder, and it leaves about a 1 inch margin on the left after it is bound. And when you look at the paper, you see even margins. So, you know, it allows the paper to have even margins when it's bound. Now, let's talk about spacing. Although the entire paper should be double spaced, there are a few exceptions to the rule. 1, footnotes. Each footnote entry should be double spaced within the entry. I'm sorry, should be single spaced, forgive me, single spaced within the entry. And there should be a single space between each footnote entry. Okay? Also, if you're indenting a quote from a book, if you have a block quote should be single spaced. However, there should be a double space above the block quote and below the block quote. Let's talk about tables and figures. Whenever you have a table or a figure of some sort within your paper, and you're describing the table or the information within the table, or within the figure, or about the table or the figure, the caption that is going to be below the table or on the side of the table or above the table, that caption should be single spaced, okay? Now, what about the font for that caption? Well, you know, a 12-point font would make it very legible. But sometimes that's difficult because you don't have enough room with a 12-point font. So in this particular circumstance, when you have a figure or a table and you have your descriptions around that, it's okay to use a 10-point font, but you cannot go below that because then it will not be legible. Okay? Also, in the appendix of your paper, there may be items in the appendix that need to be single spaced rather than double spaced. Now, if you're going to put a document within your appendix, like a sermon, for example, that sermon needs to be double spaced. But if you're going to put a poem within your appendix that you are referring to within your paper, then it should be single spaced. Or a song can be single spaced. And your professor may have preferences about certain things within the appendix that he or she wants single spaced. Last but not least, there's always and only a single space between sentences. I know that we have become accustomed to ending a sentence and then double spacing and starting a new sentence. But there should only be one space between sentences in your paper. Now let's talk about the paper itself. We want to make sure that our papers are professional. A class paper is a professional paper in the college arena. So what does that mean? That means we don't want pink paper. Okay? We don't want purple or lavender. And we don't want resume paper. Those are not items that make the paper professional. You need to use regular printing paper. for your research paper. Or even if it's just an essay, you need to use regular printing paper. And all of your documents should be printed on an inkjet or a laser printer, or another printer that's capable of producing the appearance of a professionally printed document. And all documents must be letter quality and easily readable, legible. Now let's talk about italics. This may sound a little picky, but it is necessary. Nothing within your paper should be underlined, okay? Professional papers don't have underlining within them. Rather, any word or phrase that needs to be emphasized should be in italics. Now, there are some times when there's something specific within your paper that you may need to put in quotations, but the norm is italics, okay? The titles, and I'm not talking about the documents themselves, I'm talking about the titles of books and magazines and articles and pamphlets and bulletins, long poems or essays should be italicized. And the titles of those documents should be italicized whether they're in the paper, in the footnote, in the bibliography. So anywhere in the paper where you have the title of a book, a magazine, article, etc., those titles should be italicized. Now, bold-faced letters, bold-faced type, is reserved for titles and headings within the paper, such as Chapter 3, okay, subchapter, Section 1, okay. Those items should be bold-faced, okay, unless your professor asks for something different, but but boldface is reserved for the titles and headings within the paper. Let's talk about quotations. When including the exact wording or phrase of an author within the document, it should be encased in quotations, okay? Even if the writer's exact wording is only of a part of a phrase or a sentence, it has to have quotation marks. Now, if you have a quoted passage within your paper, and that quoted passage has quotations within it, you will have to change the quotations within the quoted passage to single quotations, while the whole passage itself will have double quotations. Periods and commas should be placed inside the quotation marks, even when the marks enclose only one letter or a figure, okay? Question marks and exclamation points should go inside the quotation marks unless they are a part of the original quotation. Now let's talk about summarizing, paraphrasing, or quoting. A paper full of quotations is not a paper. It is merely a list of quotes that support a conclusion that you're trying to make. Quite often, you, the writer, can better relay the information in a manner that is more readily understood by your readers. This is called paraphrasing. And it is important that the writer paraphrases as much as possible, otherwise it will look like you're just lazy. Paraphrasing requires you to take the time to actually think about what the author's work truly portrays, break it down as much as possible, and incorporate the information into the paper in your own style. And the more that you learn to accurately paraphrase, the more you're able to develop and feel comfortable with your own writing style. When paraphrasing most of the author's words, not a few, putting it in your own words, the readers will, let me change that. When paraphrasing most of the author's words, not a few, are substituted with your own words, readers will think that you crossed the line from fair paraphrasing to plagiarism if they can match your words with those of your source. So let me put it this way. You decide that you see a quote, and rather than quote it, you want to paraphrase it and put it in your paper. But when readers look at that paraphrase, and most of the words in the paraphrase are also in the original work of the author, that's not paraphrasing. That's plagiarism. And you don't want to do that, because that just leads to an F. Okay? Plagiarism can also lead to one being put out of a program. So you don't want to do that. So it is very important for you to learn to paraphrase. When a supportive passage or section is helpful, but also quite general, it should be briefly summarized. So let's talk about when it is best to use the exact words, the quotations, okay? To quote an article rather than to quote something from an author rather than to summarize. Number one, the words specifically support your view of the paper's subject matter or your hypothesis. So, you can read something, you say, you know what? The way that this is worded, that the author has worded it, I can't, it specifically supports what I said I was going to prove in my introduction. This supports my hypothesis. Then you would use that quoted material. Or the words are from an authority who backs up your view. Okay? Number three, the words in the original source are so impressive and original that you just cannot express it in any other way. Then you want to quote it. Number four, the words express your ideas so precisely that it will serve as a main point or a statement that the paper's discussion expands upon. So you can, you may see something within, the authoritative, resource that that you can build an entire page, an entire paragraph, an entire section around, and you want to have that quoted specifically. And then last but not least, you will quote something from a writer or resource who's contradicting your view. And that kind of shows the writer that that there are those who disagree with what you are trying to prove in your paper. And you're not trying to say that there aren't others who disagree. So you might want to specifically quote some of those items from another resource that does not support your hypothesis. Just so they can know, okay, he's trying to make it fair, show that there's some other, views out there. But that what those that do support your hypothesis have a stronger viewpoint and do indeed prove what you're trying to show in your hypothesis. The next thing that we're going to talk about is giving credit where credit is due. Now, every research paper that has a footnote must also have a bibliography. And every research paper that has a bibliography must, of course, have a footnote. So, every research paper must have footnotes and a bibliography. Otherwise, it's not a research paper. Now, the knowledge that you have gained over the years through your different learning experiences and your thoughts on different subjects are yours to share in the written world. But in a research paper, okay, you have to provide some information from an authoritative source in order to convince readers of the factual probability of your work. You cannot convince your readers that what you hypothesize is true simply because of your experiences and your take on life. Okay? You got to do some research, and you have to share the research from authoritative figures with your writers. And with that being said, you also have to give credit to the author for anything and everything in the paper that you did not personally create. And that includes stuff off the internet, okay? Anything that you get also from the internet must be footnoted and must be in your bibliography. Footnotes. Footnotes is a superscript number, and as you can see on this slide, it's a very small number that follows whether it is a quote that you have or a paraphrase that you have within your research paper. It follows a phrase, it follows a sentence, it follows a quote, it follows a chart, it follows a picture that is not your own personal creation. The footnote superscript number, let's just, I'm going to call it a footnote, will also print at the bottom of the page. And it is a note that identifies the source of the material that is footnoted in the upper part of your paper. And there's a footnote format for every type of resource that you could possibly use, whether it's a book, a pamphlet, an interview, a sermon, a program from church, a flyer off of a board, that you saw in a community center. There's a format for absolutely every document that you would use within your paper. And footnotes include the author, the title, the publication information, and the page number of the resource. You should familiarize yourselves with the instructions on the basic patterns of footnotes provided again in your Turabian, which is your best friend. You cannot get around it. Okay? It can make or break a paper. And the first line of footnotes is automatically indented. And then, when your computer is formatted, for the Turabian, it will indent also, automatically. But there's a single space between the superscript, which is the footnote at the bottom, and the footnote itself. And as we discussed earlier, there's a single space within the entry. Then there's a single space between each footnote entry. Now, as we said, if you got footnotes, you have to have a bibliography. And so the bibliography is an alphabetized source of everything that is footnoted in the resource paper. And what is alphabetized is the last name of the author, or the editors, or the translators, or the name of an organization or groups or institutions whose information you are using within the paper. Now, the Turabian states that there are certain resources that don't have to be footnoted, like newspaper articles or the Bible or well-known English plays and performances. However, at the Eastern Carolina Christian College and Seminary, no matter what it is, if it is within your paper, if it is discussed in any shape, form, or fashion, presented in any shape, form, or fashion, it must have a footnote. And the bibliography entries include, of course, the author, the title, and the publication information. And of course, because of the many different resources that you have, there are varying formats for varying resources. Once again, it is important to go to the Turabian to find your resource within here, to make sure that your bibliography is correct. Now, as you're reading through it, it will give you instructions on how to do specific documents. However, there's a shortcut. The Turabian is a book itself, and it's on research. So therefore, the Turabian itself must have a bibliography. So you can go to the Turabian's bibliography, and it breaks up its bibliography into sections on different documents. So there's a section on internet databases, and under that they have listed the different internet databases that they have utilized in completing this manual. So therefore, you can just look on the internet database and say, I use that. Let me see how I can use. Okay, that's what it looks like, and it doesn't matter. It has documents under the humanities, the social sciences, the natural sciences, and the different documents or resources utilized in this bibliography, range from plays to musicals to organizations that have provided different items for this manual. So the K-Turabian, again, is your best friend. And besides telling you how to, again, complete a bibliography, you can go to its bibliography and look for a pamphlet in there, how they did a pamphlet in their bibliography. That's how you do yours, and you can never go wrong. We're going to move on to summarizing made simple. Learning to summarize helps you become more focused and creative, as well as helps you become a better writer. And learning to summarize other documents rather than having all those quotes like we talked about earlier helps you become confident in your own thought process and in your ability as a writer. And learning to summarize helps you spend less time note-taking and using abstract or unuseful material in your paper. In other words, learning to summarize helps you waste no time, okay? Although it takes a little while for you to become a pro at summarizing, there are a few simple suggestions I would like to provide to help you on your way. Number one, when you're reading a passage, don't just skim over the passage or the text or the paragraph, but actually read it through from beginning to end. And after you have read it through, go back and read it again. Number two, for the second reading, write down the main points and the items that support the main point and that support the main points in your own words. Okay, so whatever's in there that supports your hypothesis and the things that you're trying to show in the paper, jot them down in your own words. Okay? And there can be more than one point. Number three, pull those main points or supporting ideas together in 3 sentences or less. The goal is to summarize in 2 sentences or less, but that's not always possible. And last, take a break from it, come back later and edit your summary of the different resources that you have gone through. Okay? Now, I just want to cover just a few more writing tips, and that is determining what person you're going to write in. There's first person, which is I or we. Second person is you. Third person is he, she, it, or they. Okay? And that's what you're using within your writing. The first person is when the writer is speaking about themselves and you using the words I, my, we, and us. Second person is you talking to someone else, using the words, for example, you. Third person is talking about someone else, using words like he, she, they, or it, or the writer. Okay? Generally in a research paper, especially at the graduate level, you're talking about, when referring to yourself, you're referring to yourself as the writer, the researcher. Okay? When you're instructing the reader, okay, that is, if your paper is one of instruction, you're instructing the reader, you can use the word you, or you can simply use, you can use we, or you can use one, okay? But you don't, throughout your paper, you don't go back and forth between he, I, and you, and she, and we, and one, and the researcher, okay? That's all a no-no. You have to be very specific, and your professor, of course, will tell you what their preference is for your paper, whether it is in second person or whether it is in third person. You have to rely upon your professor for that. I just covered some basics here, and I have provided slides for you to look at as we have gone along. But writing a paper is not simple. So I hope that I will see you face to face when I do a more in-depth session on the smooth writer. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.